again. I dare you. I double dare you, mother.
Get busy living. You get busy dying.
Open the pod bay doors, Hal.
You're gonna need a bigger boat. And here we go.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Cinema Cult Podcast. I'm your host, Cody Malouf. With me, as always, my co-host, Dante Troina. And Dante, this is a pretty special episode. We have our friend and filmmaker, Emilio Torres, with us today. First interview of the podcast. Emilio, welcome to the Cinema Cult.
Thank you guys for having me on. I'm very excited to be here. I'm honored to be a first interview, but we've known each other for a very long time, if our listeners don't know.
Yes, we're all from Ketchikan, where we want to talk about your new film, The Ladder, where it was shot and set. We're all from Ketchikan. Dante and I are in Ketchikan right now. So yeah,
on set of The Ladder.
We are on location.
Right.
Exactly.
But yeah, we've gone to school together for a while. I think you moved away in, what was it, junior year of high school?
No, I actually moved away between 8th grade and freshman year of high school.
Okay.
So right after Schoenbar, I moved away, and I was in Seattle throughout high school. But I think we met through basketball because I went to Tonga school, so we didn't go to elementary together.
Yeah, I think you're right. That's probably the first time you and I, and probably, I don't know, Dante probably too, we all played
KDL
KDL together.
yeah.
KDL.
So, yeah, funny how that works in a small town.
Our
But
boys turned to men.
Exactly.
but we've all kind of developed an interest in film over, I don't know, the past however many years. For you, I'm sure it's been a long time, and for Dante and I as well. You went to NYU to become a filmmaker. You studied film at NYU at the Tisch School. I studied journalism at NAU, Northern Arizona. And Dante is just an enthusiast. Dante just loves movies too, but you don't need to have like a formal education in any way to love movies. So I wondered if you could just talk a little bit, Emilio, about why you wanted to become a filmmaker in the first place and kind of how you've come to this point.
Yeah, totally. Well, definitely, like you mentioned, I grew up in Ketchikan, and yes, I did KDL and lots of kids' activities growing up, but definitely the most impactful activity I did growing up was doing theater with First City Players. They'd have like kind of kids shows during the summer and over spring break that I would do, and they had different shows that my family would do together, and so that kind of introduced me to storytelling and sort of acting in general. And then I think growing up doing theater, I also just always loved movies. Like I think if, our family, kind of the thing we did together as a family, we'd watch movies. Either we'd go to the theater and watch movies, or like my dad is the type of person where like if he hears you haven't seen a movie, he will not, like, the rest of the day the plans are gone. He's like, all right, sit down, we're gonna watch this movie. So he definitely showed me a lot of important movies as a kid. And we all grew up in a time where like it's interesting to think about kids growing up now who just like know that TikTok and YouTube exists, but like we really like started accessing the internet when YouTuber as a concept was really taking off. So I think you guys are probably like me, where like YouTube really influenced a lot, and I definitely got into a lot of like movie making YouTube channels like Film Riot and things like that. And around that time, I got my first camera. I think it was like Christmas of 2008, and it was like a little flip camera. Did you guys ever have a flip camera?
I remember those.
I had the
yes.
flip video.
Yeah, the flip video I think was so genius. And I mean, we have phones now, but at the time that was like such a revolutionary concept to just have a little camera that you could fit in your pocket and pull out and take quick videos. And that's really where I got started. So pretty much since 9 years old, I was doing theater as a little kid, and I had a camera, and I just started putting the pieces together. I definitely had also around that time an aha moment of watching the behind the scenes of Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. They just had the re-release of that movie, so I was kind of reflecting on this. But I remember specifically watching the behind the scenes on that. And I don't know how you guys were when you were a kid, but I always like, it never came to me that there was filmmakers as a concept. Like movies just sort of existed. It was like a thing that you went and watched.
Right.
And it never occurred to me that like people made it until I watched those behind the scenes. And I was like, oh, there's people whose job is to play with lightsabers all day. I want to do that with my life.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think it's really easy to not understand like what goes into making a movie, like especially when you're a little kid. I'm not sure exactly when I kind of had that thought too, right? That there's more to this than just what you're seeing on screen. But once you start thinking about it, it's kind of hard to not think about
It
it.
never ends. Yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think, theater kind of, created that pathway for me as well. But I think like, even when you read books as a kid, or even you understand painting, like those are all art forms where it's just like one person transmitting an idea, but filmmaking is inherently collaborative. So it's hard because it's impossible for one person to just make a movie happen. You have to sort of imagine all the people who are involved with it. I also feel like the first time I really understood what a director was when I saw Moonrise Kingdom. I think I was like 12 at the time, or maybe 13. And I remember telling my mom, I'm like, this movie, like, I can't explain why, but it reminds me of Fantastic Mr. Fox, which I had watched because it was like an animated movie.
Mhm.
And then my mom looked it up. She's like, oh, it's the same director. And I was like, what does that mean? And then, that could sort of like took my whole pathway down that way.
Yeah. Dante, you got anything here?
No, I came to a similar experience. I put in the wrong disc when I had the Lord of the Rings special editions, and I put in the wrong disc and pressed play on the behind the scenes and didn't stop watching it. And it was all about Gollum. It was of the Two Towers. And I was just infatuated with how they made this creature come to life. And then as I got older into my teens, it became starting to watch like directors' commentaries, especially David Fincher was one that I'd always watched directors' commentaries of. But I like what you just said about like Wes Anderson or figuring out directors, right? And even, it happened to me last night. I was rewatching Mission Impossible 2, and I was like, this score has some weird hints of The Dark Knight in it, like some really weird like notes from it. And I look, I'm like, oh yeah, it's Hans Zimmer. Like, no shit, and
Yeah.
you come to those weird realizations every now and then where it's like, oh, I kind of do like movies and I do like connecting the dots here. Yeah.
For sure.
Emilio, I wanted to ask about kind of the journey that you've gone on up until this point. You made, I think, maybe 3 or 4 short films at NYU. I remember when I interviewed you a few years ago for the feature for the Ketchikan Daily News, you sent me links to all the short films. And so I just want to ask, like, what did you learn making all of those films that led up to the ability to make a feature? Because I think it does take a lot of learning to even get to that point where you probably feel comfortable in undertaking that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think to answer your question, I'll kind of go actually what I kind of had to learn in general from the short films before I felt ready to make a feature. Because, like I said, I grew up in Ketchikan with a camera. I'd run around, make videos. By the time I got into high school, I got involved in photography and video production in my high school. So I was sort of doing like videos for my school. But basically, until I got into NYU, I had never done real narrative filmmaking. I made videos with friends playing with iMovie, but I mean, who hasn't done that as a kid? So I never really understood it. And when I got to NYU, I got you have to make a 10-minute short film to get in. So I made a short film called That's Life, which you can still watch on YouTube if you want. It's awful, but I'm proud to have it up there because it got in. And I didn't write a script for that because I was too, self-conscious to like actually learn how to write a script. So I just had like sort of like a notes app of like, oh, these things need to happen. And then I got friends together and I completely improvising, like, okay, we're gonna do this, you do that. I was shooting and editing and all that. And I edited an iMovie. Somehow I got in. I'm sure my other application stuff helped out. But immediately when I went to NYU, I mean, just to paint a picture for you guys, like some of my classmates were Martin Scorsese's daughter, Francesca Scorsese.
Francesca.
And, she's listening to this, friend, but, it was just kind of like, I remember I had this moment where we were in this group chat with like new students and she joined the group chat and I was like, LOL, any relation? And she's like, yeah, he's my dad. And I thought she was joking. I was like, oh yeah, he's my dad too. And then like, moments later, I was like, oh, they've had things. Oh, this is really his daughter, And then I also had friends who had already made feature films before they went to NYU. They'd already shot on cinema cameras. I knew nothing. I didn't even know what a director of photography was when I went to film school. I legitimately thought it was like the behind the scenes, like marketing photographer. Like it never occurred to me. And so for me, NYU was valuable just because I learned so much of the stuff that like you should know if you're going to get into this industry. And really, my short films I made at NYU was sort of my challenge to myself to catch up with my colleagues. And so after freshman year at NYU, you actually don't make any short films your freshman year. I actually think it's really smart that they do that. They make you do a semester focused just on photography and visual storytelling. And then in your second semester, you focus on audio storytelling. So you learn how to sound mix and,
Cool.
use music and all that. And it's not until your sophomore year you even begin to make short films. And between my freshman and sophomore year, I made a short film. And this one was better because there was a script and a crew, but again, still rough around the edges. That's called Wannabe. But it was much improvement quality wise. And then originally the plan going into 2020 was I was going to make the latter short film and catch a can over the summer. Again, keep it like small scale and just do it with friends. But then COVID happened. And so I wasn't able to make it that summer. And then what I ended up graduating NYU in 3 years. And my thesis film for NYU called Valor and Sacrifice, which I'm still proud of. It's on my website and YouTube. You can check it out. That was really, I think, where I had one of the biggest leaps as a filmmaker. Like I had done classes at NYU that really taught me directing and made some projects I was proud of. And by the time that project came along, it had been 2 years since I had shot my last short film. And just learning NYU, studying, watching directors' commentaries, all that stuff. And I really think that was kind of my biggest step up where I could like, oh, I made something that most people, when they watched it, especially like people from Catch Can or family friends, like the most common compliment, which you kind of hope for as an indie filmmaker is like, wow, this looks like a real movie. Like that's what everyone told me. So I think that was sort of a huge confidence boost. It ended up winning the NYU like student film festival. And then sort of from the prize money I got from that, I self-funded a small project called The Fix. And that film was definitely one that I think I really nailed my like directing and writing process. And that went to like 30 festivals. And, you know, in the mix of that, I also made the Ladder short film, which we can talk more about, kind of this whole ladder coming together specifically. But across the short films, when I think about it, it definitely was like, I still have the same sort of sensibilities and taste that I had when I first got to NYU, and the same sort of like person I am. But what I learned on all these projects is like, oh, this is how you take an idea and communicate it into a script. This is how you build a team. This is how you choose, you know, what creative choices that make your project seem elevated. And, you know, there's lots of other stuff I learned, but I think what The Fix was really the short that made me have the most confidence that I could direct a feature, is once you get enough shorts under your belt, I mean, when you can tell a story in 15 minutes, it's very hard. But if you really feel confident that you can do that, there is just sort of a switch in your brain where you're like, well, if I can do a quality 15-minute short film with a crew and a cast, at some point it's just math. Like I just got to do that 4 more times and then I have an hour. You know what I mean? So
Right.
that's a long, convoluted answer, but those are sort of the components that built together in my career.
Yeah, do you
How-
think
how-
sorry, Dante, do you think is it maybe harder to tell a story in 15 minutes versus over the course of like a feature length film, or is that maybe easier because you have a lot more time to play with?
Well, I mean, I definitely think there are bad short films. You know, don't get me wrong. And there's even short films that I have in my portfolio that I'm proud of for one reason or another, but I can admit they're not the greatest short films. I do think there's a misnomer in short films where people think that short films are like feature films, but just, you know, like a part of it, or like a big story that you condense into 15 minutes. One of the mentors that influenced me the most in film school, he always really advocated for the concept of short films are not stories that you know put into 15 minutes. They are moments that you stretch out to 15 minutes. And I think if you can sort of get your concept, your mind around that, then like there's not really a functional difference between telling a 90-minute story and a 15-minute story. It's just understanding like what you're trying to accomplish. And I think there are definitely feature films I've seen, and I'm sure you guys have seen them, where like you're like, this maybe like I kind of got the point in the first 30 minutes, and then the rest, you know, I'm just sitting around for the rest of it. And
all
I've
the
also
time.
seen short films where it's like, oh, this was like way too much story to try to pack in, and I just don't really care about these characters because I'm just too focused on all the details, you know?
So in your writing process, you were talking about how early in your career you wanted to plan moments, especially getting into NYU. It was about moment to moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did you refine that into finding the length, maybe for the latter, right? Was it
Mm-hmm.
moments that built into a story, or was it a story and a through line, or are you trying to fit a certain runtime? How did it work on your writing side for the latter in particular?
Yeah, well, I made The Ladder as a short film first, right? It
Right.
got shot in 2021 and had its world premiere in 2022, and then eventually released publicly in 2023. And when I started making that short film, The Ladder, it was the first project I made after graduating NYU. So it was an independent project, and you know, I did a crowdfunding campaign, and all of Catch Can really came together to help make it happen. And I think at that point, I knew I wanted it to either be a feature length story or like, at the time, and it's still the case now, but especially in that like 2021 era, it was very popular for like the 4 to 6 episode miniseries. So I was like, well,
Oh
maybe The
yeah.
Ladder is like one of those shows. And, you know, it that was more just from like a career, like, oh, at some point, I mean, my dream is to be a full-time narrative feature director. So, you know, I need to work toward that. Um, but definitely I could tell, and I think even if you watch the latter short film, I'm very proud of it. But I think that's an example of a short film where you can tell that like there's more story to be told, but it just had to be 15 minutes rather than my short film The Fix, where I really think it's a moment that got stretched out to 15 minutes. In terms of finding the story length, the ladder is interesting because I mean, I guess, for listeners, the premise of the ladder is it's about an aging fisherman named Arthur in Ketchikan, Alaska, who in the twilight of his life is struggling to keep up with the demands of work. And he gets offered this procedure that lets him upload his memories into a machine and basically copy him into a new body and get a fresh start at life. And so it's a sci-fi drama, but when I actually started writing it, I actually didn't start with the sci-fi concept. I really just wanted to write a story because at that time in my life, I was navigating, and I'm sure you guys have experienced this, like the sort of like after you leave for high school, it's like, okay, yes, parents, you are my parents, but also now I'm defining my own life. And then especially if you're like living at home with parents, you like navigate those weird things. And so I was dealing with my own sort of, family dynamics I was navigating as I grew up with my own parents. And so I wanted to write a story about that. So really like the first draft of the ladder is just a phone call between Arthur and his son Ryan, and there's no sci-fi elements. And then as I started writing and I realized that what I wanted the story to be was this journey for Arthur to embrace this later chapter of his life, it became clear to me that like I needed a conflict that allowed him to go through that transformation. And then once I had that conflict, it was a sci-fi element. And then once I started building out the sci-fi world building, that's when I realized like, okay, this is going to be a 100-page script, which is what it ended up being.
Yeah, I think Dante and we both want to talk to you more about like specific moments in the movie because we had a lot of stuff like watching the movie together, a lot of stuff where we just catch it and we're like, this is something we need to talk to him about.
Yeah.
But before I go there, I want to ask really quick, is it like daunting to sit down with the blank page and really write that feature length film? I mean, I know it has to be scary. You talked at the premiere, the Phoenix Film Festival premiere where I saw you. So I'm gonna ask you about your influences, and you talked about influences on this movie, stuff like Ikuru from Kurosawa and Nomadland. Were those in your mind when you sat down to write this movie, or did they kind of come to you as you're writing it?
Well, for this movie in particular, like I said, it sort of started with, okay, I know this is a theme I want to explore. So before I even start writing dialogue or the script itself, I have to have a pretty, confident take on that theme. So in 2021, or I can't remember the exact time, but when I really started pursuing production on the ladder, I kind of went on Letterboxd and like looked up like movies about aging and and so and I knew movies like The Lobster or whatever that like I would take inspiration from for one reason or another. So definitely like anytime I'm working on a new project, I watch a lot of stuff that other directors have done just to kind of see like what artists have done about this topic. I also really like what exploring non-movies. Like I think you can look at paintings and short stories and things like that. So definitely they were kind of like before I even start writing, it's there. And I'm also someone who I don't necessarily do outlining in the most traditional sense of outlining, but I really want to like write about the concept that the movie's about for myself, even if no one else reads it, just so I can get my words on paper about what I think. Because ultimately my approach to writing and directing is when I got to NYU, I really was, you start working with these cool cameras and you have access to all these resources. Like, I definitely think there is an instinct or a desire to be like, oh, I want to make an action movie or I want to do this. And then I had this one class at NYU called Sight and Sound where you make like 5 kind of mini exercises in a semester. And I remember I kept getting clowned on by my professor because like my first few assignments, it was like I cared more about the camera trick I was doing in the film than the story. Like I was like, oh, I want to do this in one take, or oh, I want to do this all in close-ups or whatever. And it like that was what was more important to me than like actual story I was telling. And he was like, you need to have a why or what you're trying to say. And then your choices as a writer, your choices as a director, they're all meant to express that. And so for me, it is very daunting when I'm looking at a blank page. But when I sort of do that research, and when I'm saying research, I'm not necessarily talking about like actual, like I'm not reading Wikipedia articles. I'm watching things, I'm listening to things. I like listening to podcast interviews, about topics that I might be writing about. And then I sort of have a really strong opinion. And I think when I have a strong opinion about the theme, about what I want the characters to go through, that's when the writing becomes a lot easier. And then I'm a big advocate of like, your first draft is going to suck no matter what. So at some point, once you're ready to write, you just got to get through it and it's going to be awful and you're going to hate it. But then, like the ladder had multiple rewrites before we landed on the lock script.
What was the process? How long did that take to get to the shooting script?
So the short film was a very long process because of COVID. I started writing that script in spring 2020 with the intention to shoot it summer 2020. Then COVID happened. I probably didn't touch the script for a while. But then what was really cool is my final year at NYU, it was over Zoom. I finished my degree online, but I did take a writing the short screenplay class. And actually, it was being taught by Ezra Sachs, who is the head of the Tisch Film School. He just happened to be teaching that class that semester. And so I took it with him. And it was really cool. I mean, I got to workshop the script in his class. And I also worked with another screenwriting professor previously named Mark Horowitz, and he's written some stuff. And really, I think I figured out a lot of the world building stuff in the short film. So I wrote that over the course of that year and locked that script probably in like May or June of 2021. And then we shot in July of 2021. And if you watch the short film and then you watch the feature film, it's definitely a very similar story arc. It's just the feature film sort of expands on sort of like what happens after the short and then what happened before the short in a way. And so once the short film was completed, I started writing the feature length version. So the short film came out, like I said, in like 2022, and we started shooting the feature film in 2023 fall. So probably like a year and a half of writing. And a lot of that, like I said, a lot of that first few months of writing isn't me sitting down and writing out dialogue. It's like watching a movie and, organizing my thoughts, looking for references, kind of figuring out what I want to do. And then of course, for an indie film of this scale and indie film in our circumstance, I'm also like thinking like a producer. Unfortunately, like I would love to just write and be as creative as possible, but you have to make the movie on a budget. So I'm also thinking about, okay, what locations in Ketchikan do I have access to? What actors in Ketchikan do I have access to? Let me write scenes that work for that. I can't write something that I have no idea how I'm going to shoot.
Yeah, Dante, you have any other big picture general stuff before we get into the nitty gritty, the stuff we want to talk about the movie specifically?
No, I was going to ask something similar about like, when do you know that you're done? When do you feel fulfilled with each script, whether it's length, it's what, and maybe the answer is never, right? But
Yeah.
is there ever a spot where you're just like, okay, I have the ladder, I have whatever project you're working on, it's what it needs to be right now?
I would say I think as an artist, I'm a big advocate of like, I don't know how else I can get anything done unless I set deadlines for myself and respect them. I think that there are writers who are much stronger than me who will not finish writing a script until it's perfect. I think if I lived in that world, I wouldn't have made my first feature by the time I was 25. I just had to go. And so
Right.
it was done a 1 month before we shot the movie because my crew needed it to be locked so then they could start, doing pre-production. But I mean, even now, and we could talk about it, but yeah, there's things about the movie that like I have, I'm like, oh, I wish I could have gone this way. But what my take on it is like, whatever movie I'm working on right now is not going to be better than my next film. So I
Right.
want to see this project through, do the very best I can at this point in my life with the confidence that I'm going to make other films in the future.
Yeah, I'm sure it's
Awesome.
hard to watch your movie at play all these festivals because you just I'm sure see everything that you couldn't get in or something that
Right.
you think might be wrong with it, but obviously the viewers aren't thinking that.
Yeah, I would say I always hear in interviews that like directors don't like watching their own movies at festivals, or like maybe they'll like watch the first 10 minutes and then go out to the lobby until it's over. And I remember I used to hear those interviews and think like, why would you ever do that? Like, that's so awesome to watch a movie in the theater. I would never not want to watch it, but I can attest that after 6 festival screenings and all the, hundreds of times I've watched the movie, it's hard for me to watch it. Not just because it's not hard because in a self-deprecating way. It's just I get bored. I mean, I know the movie.
Right. Well, Dante, I think when we watched the movie, the thing that really stood out to us that
Yes.
struck us visually was all like the visual storytelling was the lighting, the cinematography, and the blocking was the stuff that we
Yep.
thought I think really affected us the most. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I got to give a shout out, obviously, on the cinematography and to my team. My director of photography was Toby Romero. What was really awesome about collaborating with Toby is that he was actually my college roommate. We met at freshman year of NYU. He was like one of my first friends I made there. And what was really cool initially when we first connected was that, as I told you, my background was like a kid who didn't know a lot of technical stuff, but loved theater and loved making videos with my camera and loved movies. And then Toby had a completely different background. His background was like in surfing and skating and snowboarding and sort of like extreme sports. And he got interested in video to shoot, skateboarding and surfing and stuff like that. And he grew up in LA, so he was around film production. So it wasn't really like this like mystic thing for him. But he got into, camera work in high school. He did this program called Ghetto Film School that like made him get really knowledgeable on technical skills. So by the time that we got to NYU, he like had no background in acting or writing, but he loved cameras and technical stuff. And I was like the opposite. So we were immediately a good collaboration. And he's, shot a lot of my shorts and projects, and obviously shot The Ladder. And I also, of course, shout out our gaffer, Jackson Yeomans, and our whole camera team, Jake Epoxy, Taylor J. Williams, who was our first AC. And also when you're talking about visuals, you also have to give credit to our production designer, Natalia Ferrara, our costume designer, Katrina Vergara. They all obviously all played a part in that look. I would say, I'm very proud of the cinematography in the film too. I feel like if there's any compliment I get from people in the industry is the cinematography, or the fact that it looks so high quality. And I just think that comes down to lots of preparation. What was great is Toby had shot the short film, so he had been to Ketchikan before, and we had kind of shot a lot of these scenes, but in my opinion, we improved like tenfold on the blocking and the lighting by the feature. But I think Toby and I luckily have a skill set of doing a lot of prep. Like the whole month leading up to the shoot, we would be meeting basically every day, talking about each scene, how I wanted to shoot it. And sort of my process is like, I start with the script, and then almost like we're directing theater, I plan the blocking of what the character's going to do in the scene. Once I know what the blocking is going to be, then I choose my shots based on what that blocking would be. And then once I have my shot like type, then Toby's doing the work of like, how do we light this? We some directors kind of let their DP choose what lenses they want to shoot on. I'm much more involved in like choosing which lens we're on. But one thing that was really cool about this film is that Toby got us these beautiful lenses to shoot on, and Cook S4s, which have like just a really nice look. And what we kind of decided on is that in the psychology of the film, it's about Arthur going through this process and really feeling small in the context of the world, feeling far from Ryan, and feeling kind of just like overwhelmed by this weird stuff going on. So to kind of capture that, we wanted to do close-ups with wide angle lenses. So if you watch the movie, a lot of the close-ups on Arthur are on wider lenses, or any of the characters. And then when we're away from characters, like one shot I love is when Ryan is walking on the dock to meet up with Joe on the boat. Like we used a really long lens. And normally when you're shooting, like for wide shots, you use wide lenses, and close-ups, you lose tight lenses. But I think by just making that switch of that, it kind of made a unique look that we really liked.
Yeah, I think you're obviously the director, but I think you're absolutely correct about that. Like you feel, when I was watching, I can see that you had so much fun playing with the lighting and with the lenses, and through and through, it is Arthur's movie, right? It's Arthur's story. And I'd say about 70% of the movie is focused solely on Arthur in the shots, in the narrative, and what it wants to serve for him. And seeing you play with the lighting and some of the mirror shots, and making him look older in times with the lighting, and making him feel isolated. He's a man that has lost his place in the world, or maybe lost his purpose. Lighting in particular, how'd you do it, man? There's times where I just like, Cody brought up the interiors especially, but
Yeah.
I think the lighting, it looked crisp, and I kept saying that to Cody, this looks crisp, man. And you said it like, it looks like a real movie. But what was your influence with lighting? Do you feel like you got every lighting, especially in the shots, the way you want it to be?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because kind of in the lighting conversation, with indie filmmaking, there's always the budget conversation. So that's like, okay, if you had all the lights in the world, you could light it any way you want. But sometimes having less of a budget forces you to make creative decisions that pay off. So like, we didn't have the budget to have the biggest lighting team. And again, our lighting team was our gaffer, Jackson Yeomans, and we had one grip, Andrew, and we sometimes had a swing grip if we had help. His is Michael. He actually lives locally in Ketchikan. But for context, I think our movie looks like it's lit by like a 6-person or more lighting team, but it was lit by like a 2-person team. And I think that has to do with, one, the benefit of shooting in Ketchikan exteriors is if you're shooting in October, as you guys know, it's going to be gray and blue every single day. So you can kind of point the camera anywhere and it's going to be really flat lighting. But to contrast that, we wanted all of our interiors to be super warm, dark, and also just the fact that Arthur is this curmudgeon who lives alone and is sad. We can use the fact that we don't have a ton of lighting units to make this sort of like contrasty dark look and it not be weird. If he was happy and like was living a great life, it'd be weird if all his interiors are so dark and warm. But for us, it helped the narrative. I mean, just specifically for the living room itself, I mean, what was really cool is that we got access to Arthur's house for the full length of our production. And if you watch the short film of The Ladder, that is living room. It's the same house, but it's the living room in the Ladder short film. We didn't really like dress it. For the feature film, what was really cool, and I don't know if you guys know this or not, we posted about the fact that we wanted to decorate Arthur's house with like Ketchikan items. And so our production designer said, oh, we're looking for lamps, we're looking for rugs, we're looking for tables. And literally like, everybody in Ketchikan came out. So that house is like a mishmash of like little trinkets from all these different people's homes. I think kind of the main concept was we wanted to make sure that the lighting was always supporting the emotion of the scene. So like I think one of my favorite lit scenes is like the dinner scene where Arthur, Ryan, and Emily talk about a reveal in the movie. I mean, I guess we should just get into it. If you haven't watched the movie yet,
Yes,
this podcast, stop listening now. But when they reveal that she's pregnant and talks about that, like that was one, and that was also, we actually saw that our first day of production. That was a situation where literally we blacked out all the windows. We spent probably like an hour setting up the lighting and used these units that were just out of frame and try to create this look. And what was really cool is like Natalia found these lamps to put in the background that were practical lights, but kind of added stuff to it. And then, I mean, a big part of it definitely is finding good locations. I mean, like I think about another scene that has really good lighting is when we shot the Act of Life upload room scene, and that one we didn't really add lights to that. That was just the lighting that was there because there's these giant windows in the lobby there. So those are just some examples. I mean, I feel like it's difficult, but I'd say in general it was one of those situations where we didn't have the budget for a ton of lights, so we could never light interiors that brightly anyway. So then we use it to our advantage to like add contrast and add emotion.
Well, I was telling Cody, Cody. I was telling Cody, like, the landing in Cape Fox have never looked so damn good.
Thank you.
I think one of the big controversies in film right now is lighting things at night and seeing your interiors at night, and even the campfire scene at night, and how clear things were, but they still had the atmosphere of nighttime and fit the story in a good way and narrative in a good way. And that was really cool to see, because I know that's a challenge for a lot of filmmakers right now.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I also got to shout out our colorist, Alexia Sangaros. I think the film looked great on set, but she definitely pulled out tons of color and texture and depth in the image that we didn't have. And she really helped us sell those looks. But thank you. I really appreciate that.
Great.
Yeah, Amelia, that upload scene that you talked about, that's I think the only scene in this movie where it goes like really hard sci-fi. Dante and I were talking about, like, we thought it would look like Blade Runner, was like the first thing that we thought. I'm just curious, we were asking ourselves this, but did you shoot that interior in Ketchikan or was that somewhere else?
No, that was shot in New York. So principal photography happened in Ketchikan in 14 days. And then we shot like 2.5 days in New York. And that includes, I mean, there's literally a scene where Ryan's walking New York, but like all the little commercial stuff and all the little stuff that like plays on TVs in the background, we shot those in New York. But we shot the upload room in New York just because like, and this is kind of a conversation. I mean, we didn't go to Europe for this, but like to build out a studio like that in Ketchikan would have been so much more expensive than just flying my cast to New York and shooting at a studio there, So yeah, that was shot in a studio in New York.
Yeah, I figured, because that was the only time where we couldn't tell that it was in Ketchikan, because obviously every other interior is like somewhere that we know, like Cape Fox, the landing, or something like that. But yeah, I was just curious about that, but it looks really cool.
Thank you. And we had a lot of fun with that scene. I mean, that scene is a lot of VFX in it, but kind of like, thoughtful, because like it's not like a complete set build. I just wanted to kind of create this feeling that it was a huge room and add these like lights in there and stuff like that and make it kind of look like a giant computer. But yeah, that was really fun for me. I mean, like I said, kind of one of my initial things getting into filmmaking was Star Wars. And even though this film is a sci-fi film, my kind of what I want to make my next feature, and kind of the stories I'm drawn to are just family dramas. So it's not necessarily that like I'm gonna be a Star Wars filmmaker, but I felt like that was the scene I got to play Star Wars for a
Cool.
bit.
Yeah, we love world building stuff. I know you do, Cody does. We're all nerds in our own ways, right? So like when the person in the background of the Act of Life stuff has the goggles on and the one visor glasses, we were cracking up at that because like awesome, that needs to be there. The Anchorage Glaciers, World Series odds for the Anchorage Glaciers. I don't know. Are they a good team or they're a bad team? I don't know. And then one more thing, the ID cards.
Yeah.
Were Pokemon holographic cards like your inspiration for the ID cards with
Oh,
young
for
and old?
sure.
They
For
were
sure.
awesome. Oh, that's great. But what do you think about the Anchorage Glaciers? Are they a good team, a bad team? That was something I was really really concerned about throughout the movie.
I think they're an excellent team in the context of the world, and of course, one day when Alaska gets their MLB team, they'll also be great, of course.
That's right.
Once the A's finally moved to Anchorage instead of Las Vegas.
Yeah.
But Dante, you reminded me of something I wanted to ask about, which was the visual effects in this movie, because there are quite a few visual effects shots. How did you go about making those, designing those, stuff from even like Dante talked about the holographic cards to the phones that they use in this movie? How did you go about designing that stuff?
Yeah, well, something I was always proud of with the latter short film is, and when I approach this story, I've always told people that's a very soft sci-fi. Like the sci-fi premise of it is just to sort of help tell the story, but it's not really a hard sci-fi. And there's no VFX in the latter short film. In fact, we still had the ID card in the short film, but that was just done completely practically. Unfortunately, the ID cards didn't work as well in the feature, so those have a little bit of VFX support on them. But obviously, for the feature film, it I felt like if you're going to live in this world with Arthur for an hour and a half, it's important that you actually believe he lives in a world in which this technology is possible. I feel like I don't want the audience to sort of be like, I don't like, there's no way this procedure is real. Like, I want them to be like, oh, Arthur lives in a world where there's more advanced technology. Got it. Let's move on with the story. So it was important to me to sort of sprinkle in VFX. But again, I didn't have the budget to do a ton of VFX. So we definitely limited which scenes VFX shows up in and try to just show it at times where I felt like it was necessary. And then, of course, I learned that there were more scenes that needed VFX than I thought of, because that always happens with VFX. But my VFX artist, his name's Nathan Rodriguez. I met him through NYU. He's an amazing VFX artist. He's done work for like the Taylor Swift Eras tour, for like the visuals on her stage and stuff like that. And he's a director himself. So it was really cool working with him. And one thing I did, which I would recommend to any filmmaker who's interested in doing VFX, is I've never done VFX before. We hired him as a VFX supervisor actually before we shot the film. He read the script. I told him which shots I imagined would have VFX in them, and then he told me how to shoot them so that there would be no issues in post. And that definitely saved us, because I feel like if I just shot it based on what I thought was the way to shoot it, we would have like wasted a lot of time. I mean, really, with technology these days, anything with VFX is possible. It just takes more time to do. There's ways that you can sort of shoot things practically to make it easier. Like, for example, if you're going to shoot a hologram, which appears in our movie a few times, you need to also have a light that like glows from where the hologram's coming from, or else when you do the VFX, it's going to look fake. But like in our film, there's people have the tattoos on the back of their neck that show they're an Act of Life patient. I had Jackson outside the frame just glowing like a little green light, so that on the skin there was a green glow. And then when Nathan added it sold the VFX better versus him having to manually add that.
Yeah, your green lighting looked much better than like the Green Lantern movie. That's for damn sure.
Wow, that's a huge compliment.
How do you tell Nathan, you said his name was your VFX artist? How does the conversation go when you're telling Nathan, you see that building, the Tongass Tower? I need a Blade Runner style big side billboard. What maybe out of those conversations was the hardest thing or thing that was most challenging with the VFX? Is it the big effect, or is it something like the neck tattoo or the ID cards?
Well, honestly, working with Nathan was really great. I mean, I learned a lot, but it wasn't really difficult. It was just more like, okay, how do we do this and, make it easy and cheap as possible to still look great. What was really, I think, a benefit for me, and I would say this is my job as a director, is that even though I'm hiring someone to do VFX artists, I still have to conceptualize, what it is, what it's going to look like, how much of the frame it takes up. And also, even though I don't do VFX specifically, I do graphic design and drawing and things like that. So basically every VFX shot you see, there's like a frame that I have where I took the shot from the movie and I drew over it like what I was wanting and wrote to him explaining what it was and really conceptualized every single thing, because that's a VFX artist's job is not to be a writer. Like conceptualizing VFX is writing, so it's important to me to do that. So I would say like really it was just kind of me playing pretend and imagining what these things looked like and how they functioned, and then going to Nathan and him being like, well, if you did it this way and change the creative this way, then that makes it more doable. And so like, for example, our phones have those holographic screens. What's kind of funny is that like I didn't want it to be that high-end sci-fi initially, but it actually ended up being, because we were shooting handheld, it was easier to have the screen project away from the phone than like him have to track every single movement of the phone as if it was a screen. And that's an example of like using creative choices to navigate how to make things happen on a budget.
Yeah, there are a few shots in this movie that really stand out to me. And I just kind of want to ask how you did some of them. In particular, the two that really stood out to me were the 3 months later transition shot, which is like very like Hitchcockian to me, where you start, on the window, you pan down, and then it transitions, you pan back up. Um, I mean, did you always kind of have that idea for the shot, or did it just kind of come together? What was was the Hitchcock in your mind when you're doing that, or is that just me projecting?
No, definitely Rear Window was the reference I told people, just kind of in the way the camera moved when we were heading into it. That shot, that transition is in the script. Like in the original draft of the script, I wrote, we pan down, says 3 months, we go to the salmon ladder, says 3 months later, we pan up and it's Joe and Arthur. So definitely that was one. And I would say that was one in our initial production meetings that my assistant director and my DP and my script supervisor were like, how are we going to do this? Because we're shooting the scene where Arthur's in his room on a completely different day than when we're shooting when, Joe and Arthur are there, and one's at night and one's during the day. And we literally shot them like a week and a half apart from each other. Like we shot the Arthur in his room, panned down to the ladder, like at the beginning of the shoot. And we shot the stuff with Joe, like basically at the end of the shoot. And that was just lots of planning. You sweat and prep so you don't bleed on set. We knew we wanted that shot. So then when we got to set the day to shoot the panning down from Arthur, we figured out where point A is going to be with the camera, where point B is going to be with the camera. And then we basically let the camera roll in the salmon ladder. And we took a bunch of pictures of like where exactly the tripod was on the sidewalk, what angle we were at. And these are things you can calculate. You can calculate like what angle is your tripod pointed at, and what coordinate on Earth is your camera positioned at. So we wrote down all those notes. And then when we went back, we were just able to reset up that shot and then pan up, and then of course in the edit. Now there's a slight like you have to adjust it a little bit to make it match up perfectly. But I think my team was impressed that it worked out, because some people had little faith, but I had a vision and we made it happen.
It's pretty seamless, and that really stood out to me the first time watching it in Phoenix at the premiere, and then again this time around. I mean, that really it's very affecting, and it really kind of puts you into the world. And then the other shot I wanted to ask you about is Arthur standing in the window towards the end of the film when he is getting ready to kind of go into the Act of Life upload. Tell me if I'm totally off base here, but it feels like you're very proud of that shot, because I keep seeing it in all the promo and everything, and rightfully so. But are you proud of that shot? I'm sure you are. And then how did that come together?
Yeah, well, so that whole Act of Life lobby was its own story in of itself. So I mean, I wrote the script and I knew that at some point in the movie we needed to show the Act of Life facility. And you guys grew up in Ketchikan. It was like, well, this is a cutting edge biotechnology company. There's not that many buildings in Ketchikan that I would believe actually belong to this billion-dollar biotech company, just because that's the town Ketchikan is in. And so there's lots of ways I was thinking about doing it, because like there's a world where we never show the outside of the Act of Life building. We could shoot it all in studio. We were exploring different options. And then I literally just like Googled one day, like nice houses in Ketchikan. I was like, well, maybe it's somebody's house. And there's a local community member, and she actually has an Architectural Digest interview about her house, because she built this really, really nice house that's out north in Ketchikan. And there's like an architectural, it may not be Architecture Digest, but one of those like architecture publications, they like interviewed her, and like the thumbline, the hook of the video is like, this Alaskan like built a house that can help her hear the whales like breathe, or, you know, something like that. And I watched this video, and I remember I was in rehearsal with Ryan and Arthur, with Keith Smith and Ty Hewitt, and I was like, look at this house, guys. Like, do you guys know who this is? And like Ty was like, I think I know someone who might know who that is. And then like I got in contact with someone else. And then long story short, got a hold of the homeowner. And it's this beautiful, you know, like multi-million-dollar home. It's her private house. And I'm like, hey, I know this is crazy, but like we want to shoot a movie. And in typical Ketchikan, you know, fashion, she was super supportive and let us shoot there. But there was only like one section of the house that we could shoot that didn't make it look like a house. And it just so happened that her living room like extends over the water, because that's like the visual she wanted. And so we're shooting from the, you know, basically from the rocks on the beach, pointed up at that window. And for me, I mean, Arthur in general in the movie has a lot of connections to salmon. I think for obvious reasons. And I like kind of showing him in situations where like he's in a tank, he's in water, and kind of those things. And so I definitely feel like it was a shot where like he's looking out to this beautiful Ketchikan landscape, but he's trapped and in this active life gear and about to do this other procedure. So I'm proud of that shot, and it worked really well. But that was an example of like, okay, well, we have the lobby of this facility, but where are we going to do this tank scene? And that's what we had to schedule that for New York. But that was just an example of like, if you just control what's in the frame, and that's how that shot came to be. But it was a really cool story.
It's awesome. It's a great shot.
I think I have two shots as well that I wanted to insert into the conversation for best shots in the ladder.
Awesome.
There's the shot, and this is probably you playing with space, and this is what my question is going to lead into, is how you play with space in a shot, because you have this really tight shot where you're using everything in the frame, like the interior shot where Emily and Ryan are having the conversation, and Arthur comes in and he's in the mirror.
Mhm.
And that reminded me of something like a Long Legs or Prisoners, like some sort of horror or thriller film. And then you have Ryan and Arthur's big conversation with the mountain in the background, and
Mhm.
you give them so much space in that shot. And I love, because so many movies, I think, when they're trying to shoot with a background like that, it's probably not actually a background like that. And so
Mhm.
they cut in close or use many cuts on both sides of the conversation, and you know, it kind of blurs out the background, and okay, they're in some sort of nature spot. Uh, how did you determine like where to have what conversations in this movie, and how to use space between the characters in those shots as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks for pointing that out. I would say in general, like, you know, I think you guys ever seen the movie Super 8?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep,
well, in
yep.
Super 8, there's like the director kid, and he's like, production, he's always like production value, production value. Like if you have something,
Yeah.
put it in the movie.
The
So I love
train.
Yeah.
exactly. So I think there's that aspect, right? Like, okay, well, if I have an opportunity to get a shot where you have Deer Mountain in the background and downtown Ketchikan in the background, and they can stand there and like, you know, like that's a beautiful composition. I'm gonna figure out how to put that in there. Um, and that was kind of something I knew that like I didn't know we'd get that specific shot, but I knew we'd get something like it when I was like, okay, well, this scene is going to take place because they're going to go shopping for, you know, at the tourist shop, and they're going to have this conversation on the docks. Like we probably can get an angle like this. And I wanted to have the boats in the background and stuff like that. And then for the bedroom scene, you know, that was an example of Natalia Ferrara, production designer, did a beautiful work building that space out that was all dressed by her. And I was like, well, I want to show that as much as possible. But that being said, I don't think I was ever intending for those films to actually land as they did when I initially shot them, because I'll tell you guys, like for both Ryan and Arthur's argument, there's tons of coverage that didn't make the final cut. Not different lines, but different angles and shots and stuff. And then for Ryan and Emily's scene, there is a shot of Ryan's close up, Emily's close up, and Arthur's close up to kind of cut it like a more typical scene, because I like to get coverage. And really, it was my editor Santiago, who found these scenes. Another example of one is when they're at Parnassus bookstore, where like I intended for it to kind of cut in a typical fashion, and he was like, actually, I think the performances are best, and it's really, you can really feel the tension when you stay in a wide in these scenes. Which I agree with, and wasn't something that I just thought of just because I'm typically like, well, you establish a scene, then you go to close up, you move on,
Right.
right? And so I really appreciate it for Santiago, because he he didn't like ask me if he could do that. He just did that and then showed me the first cut. And I was like, I was gonna say I want close-ups, but actually you're right. Like it's working well for the audience to sit in the uncomfortability of this tension in space.
Keep all these people close, man. I think you have some pretty good people around you that align with your vision too. So, and
Of course.
can tell you no or can disagree with you for a better result for both of you. So that's amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah, leading into that, I mean, going to NYU, meeting all these people, I feel like it seems you've built like a nice circle of people who you can trust, you can work with and collaborate with. Um, Obviously film is very collaborative. Can you talk a little bit about how Ketchikan came together? You mentioned a little bit, but you crowdfunded this movie. People donated things to help with set dressing. People let you film in their houses. I feel like that doesn't happen a lot in movies. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say point blank, like this movie would not exist without the community of Ketchikan. It's very rare to, especially like in with all different types of challenges that arts organizations face and things like that. Like for a community to have an arts community and to come together to like make art, is incredibly powerful and really cool. And so, yeah, I would say for those who don't know, like this movie, our official sponsors, the Tongass Federal Credit Union, our producers and investors, are local Ketchikan people who are from Ketchikan and kind of knew me growing up and kind of wanted to see this film come together. And we crowdfunded over $50,000, the majority of which were small donations from people in Ketchikan. And not even just aside from the money, I mean, we got all of our locations for free. We had different businesses in town give us things for free. Like everybody came together to make the movie. And I'm so grateful to the community of Ketchikan and everybody who was involved to make it happen. And it sucks because, when you're doing an indie film circuit, you're doing these festivals. And so, all the people who made this movie happen, they haven't had a chance to like just watch the movie, but I'm excited for when that day comes because they should celebrate it. And as much as it's my movie, like I definitely wanted Ketchikan to feel an ownership of it and for it to be a movie that's so. My goal was to show Ketchikan as a character in the movie. And like, this is a story that can only take place in a setting like Ketchikan. And that was important to me. And that shone through. It was important to me that he was a salmon fisherman. It was important to me that we showed the Ketchikan sign and the salmon ladder and, all these different things. And so it was really cool. And what I would say is like, a lot of times people ask me like, oh, you've made a feature film, you're 25. Like, I want to make a film. Like, how do I do it? I was lucky in the sense that I knew I had a city with people who would come in and help and do all this stuff. And I also had this crew and I had this feeling that I could make it happen. But our budget was over $100,000, but like that did not need to be the budget of my first feature film. If I didn't think I could do that, but I could imagine if I live in a different town or whatever, like there are relationships that you haven't even thought of that could work out to make your movie. And the reason I bring that up is to say that like, as Ketchikan really came together, but it took a lot of effort from me, from everyone on our team, from our supporters, from the lead producer, Alexandra Hellman, to reach out to businesses and reach out to people who maybe wouldn't normally collaborate on a movie project and invite them in. Like, I think right now we're at a time in the industry where, if you guys know, like there's lots of changes happening. And in my opinion, it's sort of like the traditional pipeline of how an independent film is made is kind of disappearing. But there's like these opportunities with the democratization of filmmaking for you to do your own community building. And I think I grew up in Ketchikan doing First City Players. My dad was very involved in the community through Rotary and Chamber and all different types of things. And I think like engaging with the community and at that point not knowing that I was going to make a movie, but just because I wanted to be involved and then being able to come back one day and be like, I have this project. Do you guys want to be a part of it? That was huge. And then also, of course, I mean, every single actor in the movie, aside from young Joe and some minor roles in the background, are local actors from Ketchikan that I grew up doing theater with. And so just to have this like truly Ketchikan movie that was made by the community was very unique. And I'm so grateful. Like this movie would not exist without Ketchikan.
Yeah, I think that you talk about hoping that Ketchikan can feel some sort of ownership over this movie. I think you absolutely accomplished that. I think anyone from Ketchikan watching this movie, us included, we feel some sort of ownership because we know so well like where all this was shot, how some of it was done at least. And it's just like, you grow up in this town your whole life. It's really cool to see that reflected on screen. especially when it's someone making that movie. So I think you definitely accomplished that.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I wish I had something to compare it to because it's pretty weird seeing your own town in a movie, and there's part of this like suspending disbelief with the sci-fi world where you see Ketchikan as this sci-fi universe that's going around. And I wish there was maybe you can make another movie in Ketchikan, right? And then we'll have two to compare it to. Um, but maybe what is something that you had a hard time filming in Ketchikan as well? Like what was a
Oh,
big challenge about Ketchikan to you going back in?
well, lots of challenges. I mean, I think when I was getting funding for the movie, when I was promoting the movie, a big thing that I still take pride in is like a lot of movies that take place in Alaska don't actually shoot in Alaska. Like the one I always point to is The Proposal with Sandra Bullock. It takes
Sure.
place in Sitka, but they shot in Massachusetts. And most Alaska movies are shot in Canada, or like even lately there's been some like HBO shows that take place in Alaska and they shot it in like Iceland or Europe or whatever. Now growing up, I was always frustrated by that. And I feel like, at some point when I decided that one day I was going to make a movie, like a feature length movie, I always had that like, oh, I'll make a movie in Alaska, and actually set it in Alaska. Um, I learned quickly making this movie why it's so hard to make a movie in Alaska. So maybe I did it a little bit, but we persevered. Like one initial example is Ketchikan's awesome. We have local KPU station, and then there's other people in town who are into videography and photography, but there's no like gear rental shop in town. You can't rent filmmaking equipment. Okay. There might be a place in Juneau, but not that I know of that's like reliable. The only place I really know of is in Anchorage, because if they ever shoot stuff like National Geographic, they're going through Anchorage and shooting up there and stuff like that. And I've got in contact with them and was trying to get a quote to rent our equipment from them. But then when we started getting to logistics, like the logistics of them getting the gear from Anchorage to Ketchikan would have been so much harder and more expensive in October than if we just got it from the lower 48s and then put it on a ferry and brought it to Ketchikan. So that's what we ended up doing. And actually, myself, I live in Phoenix now. I flew to Portland, picked up our gear, drove it to Bellingham, put it on a ferry, and then it landed in Ketchikan one day before we shot. My team had to set up the truck, and one day we started shooting, shot for 14 days, and then it was back on the ferry the next day. So that was a challenge of itself. But also just the rain. I mean, as you guys know, it can, especially in October, it can start raining whenever. So like all of our gear had bags over it. Like even on dry days, we had to be prepared in case it started raining. So that was obviously difficult. But at the same time, I'm glad it was raining a lot, because when you watch a lot of short film, we shot that in July. So it's like sunny the entire time. And it always pissed me off because I'm like, Ketchikan's gray and blue. Like this can't, this isn't what I was looking for when I was telling a sad story about a man growing old. And so I'm happy we got that. But I mean, so many challenges happen. I mean, you guys know what an easy rig is? It's like basically like it's like a backpack that has like an angler fish
Okay.
hook above, and then there's a wire that comes down to the camera, and it basically takes the weight off of a camera rig from like a camera operator and distributes it into a backpack. So that is a very commonly used piece of gear. And since our movie was handheld, we got an easy rig for my DP to use basically for every shot. And like 5 days before we wrapped, the wire snapped on the easy rig. And it's a special kind of wire. You can't get it at a Walmart. So even if they wanted to ship it to us, there was no way we could do it. So then the rest of the time, he just had to like handheld hold the camera himself, like a super muscle man. That same DP, Toby, he dropped his phone in the ocean. We were shooting our boat scene.
Classic blunder.
Which that was funny because like we had radios that I could, because I was for that boat scene, like when Joe, Arthur, and Ryan are on the boat, due to the maritime law, there's only so many people you can have on a boat of that size. So we had our 3 actors, we had our boom operator, our cinematographer, our AC, and then Bill Meck, who was our boat captain of that boat. But we couldn't have any more people on in a boat of that size. So then on a follow boat where I was using a wireless monitor and a walkie-talkie, and I was directing from another boat. But what ended up happening is our walkie-talkie was getting interference and we couldn't figure it out. So it actually, for some reason, when I called Toby on my phone, it was crystal clear. So I was like, okay, we're going to do this. And Toby had like put his phone, like he thought, in a secure place and was shooting. And then like he whipped around and I just heard like I was hearing the sound of the actors. And then all of a sudden I just heard like a water splash. And I was like, Toby just dropped his phone in the ocean. And so, yeah, I mean, those sorts of things happen. I mean, there's tons of stuff. And then there's also like, there's the challenge of like small town. There's not film production that happens here a lot. I think there were a lot of organizations and businesses that agreed to help us that were like, oh yeah, little emo is going to come to town and make a movie with his friends. That sounds great. But they didn't realize like this was going to be like a major production where I had a 12-person crew and a gear truck and all this stuff. And for the most part, like everybody was super understanding and flexible and things like that. But I don't blame people when like there was sometimes challenges of like they had this certain picture of what a film set was going to look like. Versus me, I went to school in NYU, and even here in Phoenix, there's lots of commercial production. So like it's not crazy to see, this giant truck pull up and all this crew. But I think in Ketchikan, it was definitely a shocker. And small town bureaucracy, sometimes you can make a request to shut down a road and then it doesn't happen. And then, people get mad at you because you're blocking road and you're like, well, we requested this from the city. I don't know what to, things like that. But we got through in the end. So it's all good.
Yeah. Just a few little things I want to ask before we wrap it up here. First, big props to the locals don't use umbrellas line. I think we all got a kick out of that one. Dante and I did.
Yep.
Just goes to show that you know what you're talking about. Ketchikan. Like if you're watching this movie, you're not from Ketchikan, that probably just like flies right over your head. But it's so true. Like
Right.
easiest way to spot a tourist or someone that's not from here is someone that's walking around with an umbrella in their hand.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other thing I wanted to ask was, when you talked about you guys shot on the boat for the fishing scene. I love to fish. I'm a huge fisherman. How did you get the shot of the rod going off? Is there someone like out of frame tugging on the line, or what happened there?
Yeah, so like I said, Bill Mack, he was our boat captain, and he was super awesome. Like I kind of told him like I need to figure out how to make this happen. Like, do you have any ideas? And basically what he did was, on the boat, in the back was our actors and our camera team, and then he was on because he couldn't be in the like the boathouse, because if we pan the camera you would see him in there. So he was like kind of like hid on the front of the boat, and somehow, and I don't even know how he rigged this because I was on a different boat, but he rigged a fishing wire that was on the front of the boat that then went underwater and was hooked to like a weight that then was also hooked to the fishing rod that was Arthur's rod. And he somehow rigged it where like he could let go of that, and then the weight of that thing that was connected to the rod made it look like it was pulling. And then he just had to be listening, because then when they would go to grab the rod, he has to then like pull the weight back up so that they can actually start reeling in. But yeah, I mean, that was just like something that he just knew because he's also a fisherman and had this concept. And that was another thing too. I think what was really interesting for me was, as a director, like I had made short films leading up to this film, but I had made like a lot of like shorts that were limited teams. And this was my first time having a full scale team. And it was interesting for me to be like, I want to make this thing happen. And then letting my camera team and my AD sort of figure out with locals, like how to actually execute it.
So yeah, what do you want us to take away from you as a filmmaker and from this film as people from Ketchikan?
Oh, well, I mean, I guess for people from Ketchikan, like I hope you enjoy the movie. I hope that, you take away the fact that if you're from Ketchikan, you may have seen it on social media for the past 5 years of my life, me telling everyone I'm going to make this movie. And so it's fun that it's actually, coming to exist. But just like thematically in the storytelling, I mean, I definitely think I always describe the movie as a coming of age film. And when most people think about coming of age films, they think about like a boy turning into a man. But this movie is about a man sort of embracing the final chapter of his life. And I think it's interesting because when I started writing this script, there weren't as many technological advancements that scare me as there are today. I mean, there's AI, there's quantum computing, there's all these sort of like tech advancements that we're all dealing with and navigating that really change the rules of our world. And granted, like every generation has experienced something like that. And I think ultimately the movie about Arthur is like he has this technological advancements that are outside of his control and that he doesn't understand, and then his relationships are changing, and he kind of has to learn to navigate it. And so to distill that into a theme for the audience, I guess I just would say, like, I hope when you walk away from this film that maybe you reflect on your own life, your own relationships, and sort of be like, oh well, I can't change the fact that I'm growing old. I can't change the fact that the world's changing around me, and I can't change the fact that people I used to, whether it's family or friends, like used to have a certain relationship with, that's always going to constantly changing. The only thing I can control is like between now and when I die, how do I want to live my life? And, and I think that's sort of kind of what Arthur goes through and what I want people to take away from the film. And I'm really drawn to stories that are about people trying to make decisions or trying to figure out how they want to navigate a relationship, because that's ultimately what we all go through. And I think movie making and storytelling in general offers an opportunity for you to see someone that you don't think is like you kind of go through something and how they deal with it. But what happens is like you will kind of project your own experiences onto the character and take something away from it. So that's a long answer, but to make it shorter, I guess I would just say, like, I hope when you watch this movie that you enjoy it, and that, maybe you call your dad, or you decide how you want to wake up tomorrow, knowing that, you're going to die one day, and billionaires are going to keep making technology to mess up our lives. And that's just the way it is.
And between your two main characters, Arthur and his son, do you have a favorite? Are you leaning one way or the other? I mean, is one in the right, one in the wrong there?
Oh, I mean, I think they both have very strong points, and ultimately for me, like, the disagreement Ryan and Arthur have was less about me thinking that they both are right, and more just that, like, they are both having very reasonable emotional responses to each other and to the world changing around them. Definitely for me though, like, Ryan is based on me in many ways, and my own relationship with my father. And I think, like, the ironic thing was that, like, as I've gotten older and I don't live with my dad anymore and I get busier, just like Ryan, like, my dad tries to call me and I'm busy. Like, when I was making this movie about why, maybe his son should talk to his dad more often, I'm like getting calls from my own dad. I'm like, I can't answer that. I'm on set right now, you know, which is sort of, ironic. But I think my dad's proud of me and loves the movie. And I think it's important for my characters to, like, me to respect everybody, and I think it's interesting because I do think some audience members are frustrated with Ryan, and are sort of like, well, why wouldn't you want more time with your dad, or why are you being so rude to your father? But the hope is that, like, you can sort of pick up on maybe some of the reasons why Arthur wasn't the best dad from Ryan's perspective, or like when you see how stressful Ryan's life in New York is, like, you kind of get a sense of, like, oh yeah, he has other things he's dealing with, and all these characters don't exist in a vacuum. But ultimately, like, my favorite character, if I had to choose, is probably Emily, just because she's kind of like on the outside and kind of gets to observe and figure out, like, what's going on. And I always imagine that, like, there's conversations that Emily and Ryan had leading up to this trip, and she was like, "Hey, play nice with your dad," and then Ryan sort of messes it up immediately.
Um, I don't really. I could go on forever with. I have tons more stuff for you about little things about, like, people we noticed in the background, like Lori Northrup and
Oh
Mr.
yeah.
O'Hara and things like that. But I don't want to bog you down with all that. I think the last thing I really want to ask you is what's next? Are you playing a new feature? Are you writing something? Where are you going to go next from here?
Yeah, well, I'm currently writing a new feature that I want to shoot in Arizona. What's really interesting about kind of where I'm at in my career is I graduated from film school in 2021, and then I started making short films, and I made the latter feature film. But all while doing that, I've had to pay my bills. So I've had a full-time day job actually working in marketing communications for public education. And in Arizona, there's lots of it's happening in Alaska too, but there's lots of, like, state legislature and different reasons where public schools are dealing with funding crises. And so I have learned a lot about that through my day job. And it's interesting because, like, I wanted to be a filmmaker when I graduated film school and have the big Hollywood dream, but I got a job to pay my bills and then found this really fulfilling career. But thanks to the momentum of the ladder, and thanks to professional opportunities, I'm going to be taking the leap into full-time freelancing as a filmmaker and a director, which I'm really excited about. But I want to make my next feature about all these things I've learned about. So it's a movie that's going to focus on a public school teacher navigating her first year as a teacher, and kind of the picture that she has in her head going into a career and what it's supposed to look like, and then sort of dealing with the obstacles that come with it. But ultimately, why certain teachers and certain people at these public schools are really going the extra mile to try to support kids despite all the noise. So that's what I'm working on next, and I want to shoot that here in Arizona. But yeah, I also direct commercials and music videos and other projects, and so I'll be doing some exciting projects. And of course, people can go to my website emiliofilms.com to see what I'm working on.
Awesome. Well, I think like Emperor Palpatine said, we will watch your career with great interest. Um, I want to give you the floor here to talk about anything you want to say before we wrap up. And I did want to ask one more thing is, when can people watch this movie? It's just playing festivals right now. You were kind enough to send us a private link to watch the movie. When can people watch it? And then anything else you want to say to wrap up here?
Totally. Well, so first of all, Cody, Dante, thank you for having me on the podcast. It was a lot of fun. I always love the opportunity to talk about my movie and love what you're doing, and kind of love this whole Catch a Can film community we have, whether it's actors who've gone on to Netflix or, film enthusiasts. I would say if people want to keep up to date on The Ladder, the best things you can do is follow The Ladder on social media. It's at The Ladder Film on Instagram, X, on Facebook. It's The Ladder Feature Film. You also can find all of our links and all of our information if you just go to our website, which is www.theladderfilm.com. That's also going to have our upcoming screenings there for festivals. We have a couple of festivals coming up over the summer and into the fall. And basically we're going to these festivals to, we've won some awards and to sort of get buzz about the movie going, but it's also so that we can get distribution for the film. And I'll say that we've received some offers on distribution, and we're going to be working with a rep to get a deal for the film, which is really exciting. So I will say eventually it will be on streaming in some way, and we'll announce that down the line, which will be exciting. So I would say keep in the loop. I would say by the end of this year, you'll know where to watch it, and it'll be available for everybody. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on here. We really appreciate it. And yeah, we're really excited to see what you do next. So good luck. And we will definitely be there watching whatever you come up with next.
Thank you. Appreciate it.